Good morning, and thank you for joining this session of the FUS Commercialization Day entitled Standing with Giants, a discussion with Varian Medical. My name is Patrick Edelmann, and I'm a managing director with the Focus Ultrasound Foundation, helping with my partner, Emily White, to oversee the FUS Partners Initiative. We thought it'd be of value to have a discussion with an industry leader in medical technology, one that has executed both large and small. I'm joined today by our friend, Rafael Torres of Varian Medical. We're truly honored to have him as our guest to get his views on the industry and thoughts about how to grow. Rafael, for those that don't know, is the Senior Vice President for Business Development and Strategy. And in this role, he leads the company's strategic plans for growth through acquisitions, investments, and partnerships that complement their current portfolio of business. Prior to Varian, Rafael served as Global Head of Healthcare for GE Ventures and GE Equity, where he built a strategic investment portfolio of over 30 healthcare companies. He is a founding member of GE Ventures and a member of its Senior Leadership Committee, and led the investment team and represented GE on portfolio company boards, including CardioDX, InsightTech, LipoScience, Navinet, and Paradigm Health. Lastly, he was a judge of the Healthy Imagination Cancer Innovation Challenge and a member of the Startup Health Transformers Advisory Panel. We couldn't think of a more qualified individual to have the discussion today. So, Rafael, thank you for taking this time to join us today. And perhaps I'll kick it off and just start at a 30,000-foot view, if we can, of just where do you see the medtech industry right now? And kind of key trends that you see or are identifying from your vantage point.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for having me, and it is a pleasure to be part of this conversation and also to reconnect with the broader family of Focus Ultrasound. As you mentioned in the intro, I had the privilege of having served on the board of InsightTech many moons ago in to represent one of the investors there as well. And the excitement of having participated in that back 10 or so years ago continues today as we're seeing the applications expand and the number of patients, most importantly, expand. So very excited to be here. Thank you. And to answer your initial question, I am very optimistic about the resilience of the medtech industry right now. As of last year, we had seen a very steady overcoming of the previous crisis to get to revenues growing at the industry level at about 7% or so. You're talking about a couple $100 billion of medtech is in overall healthcare. These are healthy levels. Just to give you an idea, they are not as healthy as they were right before the 2008 crisis. Now with COVID, I've been spending some time, particularly in the last couple of weeks or so, listening to the quarterly reports, the webcasts from the different medtech companies. And this is obviously a tough year, but a tough year that is very much having people accelerate their transformations. And I would say that the industry should go back to a very good year starting frankly, as soon as we get a vaccine, this overall industry will return to mid-single-digit growth. So that is exciting. Most importantly, on the investment side, when you hear large cap, mid cap, and venture environments, the degree of investment continues. So we can talk about the difference amongst pockets. The allocation of capital for R&D across medtech has been somewhat emphasized on more short-term growth. And we have seen now in the last couple of years, pre-COVID crisis, a slight change towards longer-term R&D investment, which is encouraging. And the last part that I would say, in addition to the overall growth of the industry, the overall state of R&D, is the level of M&A, which is always fuel to any industry. The level of M&A in 2019 had risen quite a bit versus 2018. We're talking over 50%, in some pockets of medtech over 80%. So very, very strong growth in the amount of M&A. It came to a halt, like a lot of the economy, in the first 6 months of 2020. but since then, you're seeing a record quarter in calendar Q3. So again, optimistic that the levels of dry powder in the industry are being put at work, and that normally incentivizes innovation. So that's my view overall of the industry: growth, R&D, and fuel.
Do you think that, do you see a differentiation that maybe you saw a few years ago and last crisis coming out of this about a desire for bigger corporates in the world to think earlier in terms of how they're thinking about IP and pipeline and M&A? Is there, or is it still kind of proven out a little bit further down the line, or is there a desire to move earlier and earlier in terms of where they're willing to make their strategic decisions?
Right now, taking the crisis into account, I would say, if I had to choose one word, the word would be selectively. Yeah. If I had to say yes or no, I would probably say no, frankly. I think we had seen that trend of going earlier until recently. But with the crisis, I think people are going to focus somewhat more on differentiated assets as opposed to, better said, accelerate transformation. So that broad definition of digital health is something that I want to avoid, but to be specific about aspects that can enable better delivery of medicine remotely. And I'm being careful not to just use the word telemedicine, but artificial intelligence approaches that are going to allow doctors to practice at the top of their license. Yes, I see that being, just like you've seen in the last few years, robotic surgery being a place where people are unafraid of going early, because we're still in the early stages of penetration in terms of robotic surgery over overall surgery. However, I think very early stage acquisitions are not going to happen at the pace that happen in biotech or other areas of life sciences.
And then would you just hone in on this one last point, but are there overall key trends that you think are identifying? Is there, clearly when we talk about focused ultrasound, one of the big trends we always talk about is the idea of non-invasive. But as you think about, big key thematic points that are showing up these days when you're thinking strategically, or when other companies you're seeing strategically, are there big key trends that you're identifying that are paramount right now?
So yes, Patrick, I see a few trends. Some of them have been developing over the last couple of decades and have become more acute now. Some of them are more a product of more recent developments. The bigger one that I see is the prevalence of a data-driven, value-based care method of adoption. All of that I would wrap it around the much more significant importance of evidence in the development of offerings. And that comes in multiple flavors. It is not just your traditional randomized clinical trial, but it is about having a very clear understanding of the unmet need that you're going after and how your solution is going to capture the key benefits that the patients and the physicians that are going to adopt your solution are looking for. So be extremely clear about three things there. What are the unsatisfied needs today? This is 101, but I cannot tell you how many people say, oh, there is one unsatisfied need. What is the willingness to pay about that, right? I use this silly example that I'm going to be bold enough to share it now. I used to have an unsatisfied need to have my kids tie their shoes. And one day Nike came out with an $800 shoe that was self-tying. I'm not willing to pay that. So, you know what, kid? Learn how to tie your shoe and you will do fine. So I cannot tell you in how many cases I've seen people going after wonderful solutions, whether they are for prostate or breast cancer, but at the early stages where today you are getting over 96% 5-year survival in early stage breast cancer. We want to help the additional patients, but adopting a technology that costs more than the current standard of care, that displaces the workflow, it's not going to work. So try to understand all of those variables, develop your evidence. Your evidence, again, it can come in multiple flavors. It doesn't have to be the single track of RCTs. And it can be evidence about adoption, not about approval. It doesn't mean that you need to go with the hardest PMA type of approval. You can go, there are multiple regulatory ways now to go about it in the world, whether they are de novo, 510K with trials. Even if you are a company that is already with a product in the market, think about the evidence that you're utilizing because you're going to fare better in that adoption. Other circumstantial trends that matter now, cybersecurity matters. Med device companies keeping data, MDR in Europe now being a true change in how the EU looks at the submission as well as the capturing of data. Aligning business models also with value-based. How are, in the current basket of new payment methods that CMS just rolled out, how are your physicians, your customers gonna get paid, and to what degree those quality metrics, to what degree those data metrics matter? And supply chains are also changing, right? You have in multiple geographies more and more of a concentration of payer-provider type of systems. You're seeing it here in the US with acquisitions where that integration is happening. Surgery specific, to your point, this is a trend that has come for many years, but I think it has huge runway still, which is the ambulatory surgery center capture of more and more procedures. Well, if you're going to do things there that have traditionally gotten paid differently, how are you going to justify that adoption and the right payment for your technology? In my mind, it comes down to evidence. And again, be very open-minded about what type of evidence generation programs you have. They can be exclusively for marketing if you have your approvals. But I think Intuitive taught us very many lessons about how to do that evidence generation. So long answer, but I'm a big believer on those data-driven adoption programs.
So I think really insightful and informative. So, as I went through your bio, you've done this as both a BD person and as a VC. And so for our ecosystem, as they approach those different partners, how should they think about that different? And then as they approach those different partners, what considerations should they have for whether it's a VC, which might be more of a strategic, more just capital answer versus, a strategic or a corporate development officer that might be thinking about this in a more strategic and an overall TAM that's not just your target TAM, but the strategic's TAM that they're trying to capitalize upon. Is there a difference? And if there is, what are some key insights since you've done both?
There is a couple of differences. One is obviously about if you focus your development towards the overlapping objectives of one of the strategics that is interested in you, you are probably going to narrow your options, right? So when you wearing my hat as a board member on some of these companies, optionality matters. Optionality creates value, and it gets translated into your day-to-day activities. So a strategic can be a good investor. Hey, I pitch that in meetings multiple times a year that you may want to have Arian as an investor, formerly GE as an investor, et cetera. And it can do good for you, but at the same time, how is that going to translate into your actions, right? Let me give you 2 or 3 examples. One is your IP strategy. If you have to differentiate shareholder versus investor, right? And your investor can want you to collaborate and go very narrowly into one area. But as a shareholder representative on the board, you want to understand, okay, how can this company cause the biggest impact to everyone? And if that impact is securing rights in not just, and this is one of the acquisitions we did recently, not just in one area of cardiovascular, ventricular tachycardia, but a much bigger area of atrial fibrillation or an even broader area like renal hypertension, you have to approach your IP strategy differently. You have to file in different places. You have to consider your different types of intellectual property, whether they are know-how or field patents or composition of matter patents, etc. Again, that gets influenced by the mixture of investors that you have. So try to think separately about those. How are you going to maximize your opportunity? I'm going to pick on one word that you mentioned because I do see many young companies focusing on a TAM metric that can be deceiving, right? And I was using the example of breast or prostate cancer that are incredibly large. Isn't the metric that 1 out of every 2 men is going to develop prostate cancer after 80? I don't quote me on that, but it's something that I believe I have heard. Well, that's 50% of 50%. So 25% of all humans are going to develop if they get to that age. That's a very, very big TAM, but where are you going to contribute value and how is your solution? So number one, be specific about how you define your TAM. And if you are differentiated enough, there is going to be interest. Obviously, there are some places where it's not the case, but if it is a niche strategy, sometimes there are not a lot of solutions and you can add a lot of value. I'll tell you, companies that have focused on neuroendocrine diseases that are in late diagnostics for the most part, and it's a small population. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of solutions for them. So you end up being able to collect a fair amount of money and create a lot of value for patients when you find a solution for that. But your definition of TAM needs to come with a very thorough analysis of where are you going to add value, right? And if you eventually think you're going to add value into all of prostate cancer, hypertension, etc., show me how you're going to get there, right? Where do you start? And your first product in the market can't be to solve all of blank, right? Hypertension, renal disease, whichever, right? Number one. Number two, follow the money. Cannot tell you enough about that, right? To your point on how strategics are going to think about something, they are going to be very interested in seeing the proof of how your solution can get a differentiated adoption. Not too different than on the VC side. On the VC side, they may want to have multiple solutions to have a broader set of exit alternatives, right? But ultimately, good investors that look at the long term are going to come back to the same, which is how are you creating value in this market in a way that it is measurable? And that last part of measurable matters today more than it mattered 20 years ago. So,
and for strategics, for bigger investors, I think, frankly, for all investors, that's just as much cost effectiveness, cost comparativeness as it is clinical effectiveness. Unfortunately, these days, it seems like more and more decisions are being made not because of physician preference, but they're being made because the C-suite of XYZ hospital group determines what's going to occur. So, you highlighted this a little bit earlier, but it's that idea of thinking about reimbursement and thinking about regulatory just as early as you're thinking about anything else. Is that a fair comment?
I think it's a very, very fair comment. And look, I'm going to take this path that you have asked about to an extreme, which is even a collaboration with a strategic during your years of being an independent company can be pretty positive. But you need to make sure that you have at least two things. You need to be sure that you have an extremely clear line of sight to what are the objectives that the corporation is measuring out of your collaboration. And number two, that the right champions in that institution are aligned with those objectives. Because I have been in collaborations where we as the corporate change our mind, and the young company can come back and say, I did exactly what you asked me to do. And you are, changing your focus to something else. It is incredibly unfortunate. It happens. But you want to have an extremely clear line of sight to what specific deliverables each party is going to have and that the resources are there, right? I mean, you have multiple examples of when this has happened from collaborations, right? Collaborations that have gone into, Mazor had a collaboration with Medtronic and now it became an acquisition. You have a plethora of examples there when these things are done well. You probably have more examples when they are not done well.
It goes to show you, just given your own experience in your own representation of just how important corporate governance can be at an early stage, and representation, and how you construct your team and the board and management. It shouldn't just be about financial driven decisions. It should be about a whole host of other what different partners can bring to the game. Maybe if we could shift gears here a little bit, and you talked about this, and we had a session earlier today, just talking about alternative revenue models. And we've come from a world where it was just, and I just highlighted this a second ago, where it was about selling big capex, and increasingly it's moving away from physician preference to what the C-suite decides at a hospital. And so, are there different alternative revenue models that you're seeing right now that are interesting, or that we should think about? And if I'm a young company that hasn't gotten to that point, that I should be thinking about potentially building my business around, whether that's a more increased service modeling, whether that's some type of consumables. Like how should young companies be thinking about that right now?
It is a tough environment for capital equipment businesses now, right? Being at a place where still we have a significant part of our revenue coming from capital equipment, I can tell you that firsthand. I would start by making a differentiation between revenue model and business model, right? You can sell the same thing in multiple ways, and you still haven't changed your business model, right? And it's an academic differentiation, but I think if you're truly going to think of changing how you do business, it's not about whether I lease my machine, I charge by the click, etc. Not just that, right? Am I solving a different problem for my customer and for their customer or patient eventually, right? So I will tell you one example that we ourselves are doing, and hopefully that will help strike the importance of the difference. In one of the treatment paradigms that we address, which is Varian's legacy of being a radiation oncology company, in the workflow you need to do a therapy plan. There are no hands in a radiation treatment. Most of your audience knows that, but just think about this, right? You roll a patient that cannot feel or see their beam. The providers cannot do that either. They cannot see or feel the beam or tell whether it's going perfectly because it's not visible. And then a couple of minutes later, 6 to 9 minutes later, you tell them, "Hey, you're done. Thank you. Good luck. See you tomorrow." Or depending on how many treatments you do. So over a period of time, we've had to develop planning systems, guidance systems, and confirmation systems, right? There's many hands, very, very qualified hands that prepare and get involved in this planning, delivery, and verification. If we were to come up with a perfect AI that could do a lot of these, are we becoming a great partner to our customers by saying you can reduce a lot the number of qualified personnel that you use, doctors? Well, not necessarily, because those same doctors have, using some academic nomenclature, there are other jobs to be done, many other parts of their job that they do in a day. They need to look at the quality of the plan. Was that plan, whether it is developed by one machine or by 4 humans, does that plan have the quality in terms of depositing the energy in the right place? And now think of surgery overall, right? And how a surgery is planned. In most cases, in interventional medicine today, the plan is the minimus compared to that amount spent in delivery, and all the change that could come from that, right? But you're still not replacing the surgeon, because that same surgeon is doing many other things in terms of a pre-visit, a post-visit, a constant learning of the techniques, the training of the residents, etc., right? So what we have transformed in terms of our business model, that I personally am very proud and think is a good example of the switching of changing from selling my product differently to a true change in business model, is we started to offer a couple of years ago treatment planning as a service. There is 4 people involved in a treatment plan. Someone called a medical physicist, someone called a radiation oncologist, a technician that helps with the plan. Sometimes you have a nuclear medicine specialist, which is slightly different. You definitely have a diagnostic imaging radiologist involved. Well, as I said, the plan is, and whether we charge 100 chips, whatever it is, $3,000 for a plan, you as a provider, you still need all of these people to do a quality check, to do a discussion, frankly, on, my EMR provider just updated to version 15.0, and my medical device provider hasn't accepted that. Should I upgrade or not right now? These are literal discussions that are happening at every provider. So they have a technology manager that does that. The reason why I'm going at such depth is when you think broadly about what your customer is doing. In our case, we were asking them to find, I'm going to use the example because it's not the exact number, $3,000 to pay us, even though they weren't saving a buck. They may be getting a better quality plan because that's what we were able to deliver via the AI, and it was more machine learning than AI, but the point stands. But we transformed that business. We acquired a couple of businesses and put them together. And now what we're going to them and saying is, there is 24 jobs to be done in the day of someone who supports 2 to 6 of your facilities in technology management. I can do all of those, right? And that doesn't mean that you get rid of that person. Maybe you utilize that person much more efficiently at the idea of the top of the license, right? Help people practice at the top of the license. Like that, who does your drug formularies? Why do you need to have different people in different places when we can do it somewhat centralized? So on and so forth, right? So we have done the job. Is this a consulting job? Maybe, but it's, I would say, much more a technology-enabled service, right? We started to utilize our own systems and say, I don't solve much just by going with the AI to you if I don't allow you to optimize how you deploy these. So that's my example of business model changes is, did we invent a fantastically new technology? Marginally, but we're allowing our customers to focus on what they are good at. And we're doing this in India, in the Philippines, in Texas, in California, 2 miles from my house with definitely better internet connection than I have right now, at El Camino Hospital, et cetera, right? So it is about understanding your customer problems and delivering in a way that they can adopt it, not just in a better technology way. So very long answer, but hopefully it's an example that helps illustrate.
Extremely insightful and much appreciated. I want to be cognizant of time, so I want to hit you with 3 just kind of more rapid fire questions about just next steps. And just, quick answers as you see them. Clearly COVID set a lot of people back. Any just, brief bit of advice that you think is just for entrepreneurs, for startups in this time of COVID that you'd provide sitting from your seat?
Digital adoption has accelerated. It's obvious, doesn't need an explanation. Figure how you can leverage that. And if you haven't had that conversation, force the conversation. Because it's going to have an effect on what you are doing, no matter what it is that you're doing.
Okay. What's the best way to attract one of the giants? To get the attention of strategic or a major large investor. What's been one of the best ways you've ever seen for you?
It's interesting because to me, it isn't as much about having the newest technology, but it is understand their customer better than they do. Do your homework. And once you understand literally what problem a customer has that they are willing to pay if you were to solve it, bring ideally one pilot or one early adopter to your giant, as you described it, and say, and really describe what have you done to truly understand that customer, but ensure that that is replicable, right? As our CEO says, look, you can sell 50 of anything, right? But 500 is a lot harder. Yeah.
Well, listen, Rafael, I want to be aware of your time and just and what you've provided us. And as always, it's I feel as I've gotten to know you in recent history. I learned something every single time I speak to you, and I know our audience is grateful for the time, and the foundation is grateful for the time that you've provided. So I want to say thank you on behalf of the foundation and myself and many others in the foundation for the time, for the insights, and we wish you best of luck on Varian's own strategic actions that are going on right now. But we look forward to much more partnering in the future. So thank you so much, Rafael.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm rooting for the field. I continue to see and hope to continue to see wonderful things out of the member community of the foundation. So thank you for the work you all are doing. You, Neil, everyone there. Keep on doing what you're doing. It's causing a tremendous impact, and kudos to the work of the foundation.
Thank you, Rafael. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.